super controversial topic. It's one of those things that's on the lips of everybody. I mean, listen to these guys right here.
Negative gearing.
Negative gearing.
Negative gearing. Negative gearing.
Negative gearing.
Let's end negative gearing.
Now, I'm not saying that the affordability crisis isn't a bad thing, but I'm saying that what the hell does it mean for us as property investors? That's really what I care about. I do care about, obviously, affordability and keeping people safe and having a roof over their heads, but it's interesting to see this shift in dynamics from the government about this whole negative gearing thing, about this whole tax structuring thing. And I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to understand it, because the people that succeeding in this world are the ones that take action and see opportunity in shifts and changes. So that's why I wanted to bring on Jeremy Iannuzzelli from KHI Partners. He is an accountant. As you guys will know him from previous sessions, we've actually got his dad. In the 1980s, they had scrapped negative gearing, and Vince lived through that. So we've got Vince Iannuzzelli, who is Jeremy's dad, a guy that's taught him not everything he knows, but he taught him a lot of things. And we're going to dive in deep about what happened back in the day, what it's looking like right now, where do they see the effects of this whole negative gearing change to the world, and what does it mean for property investors? What are the things that we can be future-proofing ourselves in case it does come in, and how will this all affect us? Hey everyone, my name is Joe Tucker, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest property investment community. And we have over 77,000 members, and each week we interview top property experts and we unpack their wisdom and knowledge, and that just allows you as property investors to get more educated, to become better property investors. So if you like this stuff, subscribe, do all of that kind of fun stuff. But tonight's an interesting one. I think you're going to enjoy it. We're going to dive deep into the world of negative gearing, tax benefits, how it all fits. But you don't have to be bored, because these guys know how to talk about it. So let's jump in. One of the things that I saw was that rental prices went absolutely mental, because all of a sudden there was no rental supply, especially in Sydney and Perth. Like the rent prices went absolutely astronomical, because all of a sudden all these investors pulled out of the market, and everyone's like, well, if all the investors don't exist, then the owner occupiers have an opportunity to then buy property. What are your thoughts on that?
If the tax refund was going to help you finance a property, the tax refund from the negative gearing, and the tax refund is not there, if you're going to go into an investment, you have to accumulate more income from that investment to pay for the expenses and the interest. So the rent goes up. It's just mathematics.
I'll jump in. One of the big things that people need to also understand is marginal tax rates. That's the tax that we pay on our income. Whether it's 19% or 20, 30, 45. Back in the late 80s, tax rates were quite high. So negative gearing actually was quite a substantial amount of benefit to middle to lower income earners. Roughly, if you're earning $20,000, what were you paying in tax as a percentage?
If we're talking about, you didn't pay tax on the first $4,000. So let's compare that to where we are today. From $4,000 to about 20, you paid 30 cents in the dollar. And then you started to pay 46 cents in the dollar till $35,000. And then you started to pay more and more. So I got a couple of wage increases back in 1986, might have been, can't remember. I went into a 60% tax bracket.
Yeah, 61% in the 70s.
I was only piddly me. I was only a middle manager at PwC. I wasn't a 60%.
So putting that back into perspective is that back then, negative gearing was a substantial amount of benefit for many people. Remember, we spend $1, we get 60 cents back, compared to today, where you spend $1, even at the most highest marginal tax rate for people earning over $180,000, $190,000, you're spending that dollar, you're only getting 40 cents back. You're on a middle income earner here in Australia, you're only getting 30 cents back. So, in the late 80s and early 90s, where the tax rates were quite high, it almost sounded smart to put your money into an investment. It would be negatively geared. You're getting 60 cents back or 50 cents back. And it was almost like, okay, my dollar's actually working a lot harder for me. So negative gearing, my personal opinion, was quite a substantial amount more benefit. Now, we talk about not going into an asset for tax purposes, but it provided an individual a substantial amount more benefit than it does today. So negative gearing has changed substantially because of the marginal tax rate system that we've got here in our lower income tax that we pay, and we have paid over many years.
We are going to talk about, I want to know the narrative around, well, what's going to happen if they were to do it again? Because we spoke about when it was removed back then, investment basically stopped. And is the same thing, I suppose, going to happen? But I want to know, Jeremy, we spoke about, you said there was that sort of people are going to lose, I suppose, if 40% of if they remove it, depending on their tax bracket. But what do the numbers look like for an average mum or dad investor if negative gearing was to be removed?
Yeah, so at present, I did some numbers with some recent clients have purchased recent properties in the last 6 months, traditionally with a 20% deposit coming from equity. So, and their remaining balance coming from the bank. So roughly about 100% geared. Average income, most people are paying in that 40% tax bracket range. So 20 grand being the overall loss in most circumstances. That would result in roughly around about, give or take, an $8,000 overall tax refund. So net out-of-pocket costs for many of these clients was only about 12 grand a year. So there's a difference of roughly $400 a week versus roughly, say, about $250 a week. So big differences. Now, that negative gearing, if it's removed, that person's got to find an extra $150 a week in most circumstances to fund the difference of tax benefit they weren't receiving. And PYG variations become redundant essentially in most circumstances because the majority of people do it for tax purposes. Depreciation schedules, as we know, doesn't become as lucrative, and people will stop building brand new homes because sometimes the depreciation benefit is maybe a small reason as why we do it. They call it a grossed up depreciation benefit. So what's my yield? Add back my tax benefit attached to it, and that's my real net yield. So that really flies out the door. So there's a whole portion of the sector, Joe, that will immediately stop, and then the market adjusts. And as Dad was saying before, those people really start to lift rents to compensate the difference. As we saw with these huge rental increases post the COVID interest rate rises, as rates started to really increase, all of a sudden rents increase, and that really fuels inflation.
Where do you guys see this is going, right? So the government, like the parties are talking, like, let's scrap negative gearing, let's scrap capital gains tax and all of that kind of stuff. Like, where do you think it settles? Like, where's the line of it's most likely going to happen like this, so that we can kind of future-proof ourselves as investors?
I'll probably jump in. So there's not many people know this, and it hasn't got through the media, like, say, for instance, the significant land tax changes did in Queensland. But little do people know that for many years, the land tax threshold, say, here in New South Wales, has been indexed. So every year it's been kind of increasing as land's been increasing in value in New South Wales. But right now, the New South Wales state government has put a cap on land tax thresholds in New South Wales. So it's no longer going to be indexed anymore.
That 1.02 million, wasn't it, Jez, or something? 1.07?
Yeah, about that. 107 by memory. And it's followed suit with many other states. It's not new what New South Wales has done. They've kind of followed suit. Queensland's had a stagnant land tax threshold for individuals for, as long as I've been investing there, 10 plus years. WA, Victoria has probably been one of the only states that have come down, not increased. But, little things like that will start to creep into legislation over time, without us knowing it, or with little media impact. But personally, what I feel, and I'll let Dad share his view, I think they will start taxing property more because it's probably one of the biggest income generators here in this country and has been for a long time. More wealth in this country sits in property than pretty much any percentage of wealth anywhere in the world. America has got a significant amount of their wealth sitting with inside shares and not property. But Australia's got a very heavily and very dense amount of wealth as a per capita in property because our values are increasing so much.
Look, when they bring it in, it will be controversial. So it just won't be brought in like, oh, geez, what are we going to include in the budget this year? Let's come up with negative gearing or whatever. And that's what Bill Shorten did. Bill Shorten came up with 3 ridiculous things at a time when there wasn't a problem. In fact, people were feeling quite good. So they'll wait for the disaster, the economic disaster. You know, it could be that the mining industry, I mean, China's has said they're going to buy less because their population's decreasing. They're not going to build as many buildings. They want less iron ore. And at the moment, if you look at our national accounts, it's iron ore and coal and nothing else. Maybe a bit of lobster and wine and whatever, but it's iron ore and coal. But we're spending all the money that we're making. So let's say the iron ore royalties do come down because China says no purchases for 2026. There'll be a budgetary disaster. And that's when those type of things negative gearing will come out. We don't want to do this, but look at this. We've got all these services to fund. We hate it. I don't want to do it. But we've got to do it. We've got nothing else to do. And people sort of say, yeah, okay, I understand. You know, if the leg's bad, you got to cut it off. What can I say? You know? And so people accept the doctor cutting off their leg. And that's what will happen. It'll be a time. They'll pick the right time. And Keir Starmer in the UK, the new Prime Minister, he's pushed this. We've got a 22 billion black hole in the budget, and therefore we've got to bring in all these bad things. Now, he's been questioned so much where the 22 billion has come from, and no one knows what it is. It's just he made it up. You know, you've got to create the problem to bring in something that's unpalatable.
How does property keep increasing in value without wages growth? Like, is it then sort of, is it sustainable? Because we've seen significant growth, but where does it go in the next 10 or 15 to 20 years?
That's a good question, because the numbers are very skewy. You know, the average wage compared to a house price, if you look at the 80s and 90s at the moment, it could be 10 times the average wage is a standard property. I think our average property in Sydney is 1.4 or something. And the average wage might still be, 120. A lot of people get a lot more than that. So it does, and that's why we've got this problem that people don't can't afford it. I mean, they just can't afford it. But it's always been like that. In '78, I finished uni. I was at uni, I should say, and there was a boom. Prices went up 20% a year, 78 to 81. Then there was an 82 recession, and of course, I didn't even start at work then. I threw my hands up in the air. I'll never own a property. That's the end. It's all over. It's all over. That's it. Well, of course, then 82 came along, and by the time 86 came along, you could buy whatever you like. And then there was another boom, which I sold out and bought something else and all this type of stuff. And again, we thought in about, 89, it was the end of the world. That's it. If you're lucky, if you have a house. Then a 91 recession happened. So there's always been these crests and troughs. And think of 2009. Wasn't that the low period? 2009, GFC and all this type of stuff. It was like it was cheap. You could buy anything. And then, of course, there was the boom. 2016 was a bit low. Then it started up again. Look, there's going to be a low. That's just a fact of life. So will it always go up? I'm not a believer in straight lines. I've never seen a straight line. You know, there's always a curve coming. So will there be a curve? Absolutely, yes. Interest rates have probably stayed lower than what they should have. My belief, and I hope you're not going to get shut down by the government, but I think the government bullied the Reserve Bank. Philip Lowe was bullied, and he was sacked because he wouldn't toe the line. Michelle Bullock, I think she's by name and by nature, I think she's a Bullock. I don't think she's going to toe the line, but she's not certainly decreasing interest rates that she should have, but she probably should have put them up again to really give it that good hit. Philip Lowe, 0.25%. Really? I mean, it was ridiculous having meetings. 1%. There should have been. Remember, they went down 2.5% with COVID in a space of 4 or 5 months. Oh, no, we'll only have to do 0.25%. There should have been a 1% a month for 3 months to get that, instead of 12 quarters, to show this is it, and we'll look at it again afterwards. So, look, the rate at the moment should probably be about 5.5% to really get the inflation down. Remember what interest rates are. It's got nothing to do with property. It's simply putting a price on money. Putting a price on money. Is money worthless? I mean, in COVID, it went down to 0.1%. And virtually saying money's worthless. That's why we've got inflation. And now a lot of people think that interest rates will go back down to 0.1%. The young people say it's going to go back because that's all they remember. It's so funny. But there's got to be a price of money. Otherwise, if money's got no value, that affects not just property, it affects everything. And at the moment, there's been a lot of cash around and people have put the cash into property.
What do you think about where do house prices, can they kind of keep going that sort of 10 to 15%, or I suppose percentages can't really, but if it goes up 5% on $1 million, that's $50,000. I mean, that's more than half of what some people are earning.
If banks, the next leg of the cycle is, yes, definitely borrowing easing up will provide the next leg of the cycle. It all comes back down to a number of things. It's the money, and that's the money that's been imported into the country. Joe put up 2,500 new millionaires coming into the country. So if there's a large portion of migrants coming to the country that are quite wealthy, that will drive the property market because they know they're going to put their money into property. They've got the money to do it. They can afford it. If lending regulations start to loosen up and borrowing capacity starts to increase as a reduction of interest rates, that's also going to drive the property market. Because if we can borrow more, we do it. Not that we think we can afford it. If the bank says you can borrow 1.2 mil, we borrow 1.2 mil, where you go back to his generation. If the bank said you borrow 1.2 mil, you borrow $500,000. So very different. There's very different generation that he come from, that our children will grow up. And it's just the appetite for debt. So 3 things will drive the property market in the next cycle: the ability to borrow more money, the more wealth that's been imported into the country, millionaires that are coming in, and wealthy families that are selling up all around the world and bringing their wealth here, they will put it into property because that's what they know and that's what they've been told to do. And then the last one is the incentives from the banking legislation. They need to make money. We just saw that Westpac had a slight drop in terms of their quarterly or yearly profits or something like that. That's not going to look good for shareholders. So, things will change and banks will make money, and that's what turns the world over, and that creates currency, which creates a moving economy.
And how should investors approach future property acquisitions? Let's just say this happened and they scrap negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. How should investors approach future property acquisitions in light of these changes? Should they adjust their criteria or focus on certain areas or property types? What would you believe to be the best go-to for property investors if it happened?
Yes, I think you'll find that in the areas where there's a significantly higher portion of leveraged properties where people need to rely on negative gearing to obtain capital growth, you'll probably find a bit of a dip there. And where properties are a little bit more suited from a cash flow perspective, you might find a little bit more of a demand there. So during COVID, we saw a huge push for regional areas because why? A lot of cash flow on very lower rates. And it really drove a lot of the regional areas and gave them a significant level of increase in terms of capital value. But for a lot of people in the property space, and I've seen it as an accountant managing lots of clients, a lot of these regional area properties that were very focused on cash flow at the moment are probably pulled back a little bit because it doesn't look as attractive when you're buying a regional property for cash flow at 6.5% interest rates and it's just not there. So you've got to kind of factor in what areas are providing what type of opportunities, and sometimes the reverse will happen, and that way you could find yourself in a really good opportunity.